Welcome to Fall Perspectives. Glad that you could all make it today. Every now and then it seems people have trouble finding this room, so you may see people drift in for a while, which is okay. But on behalf of Western, I want to welcome you all here. Thanks for taking the time today and coming down here and spending, hopefully, the day with us. We've been doing these perspective things for as long as I can remember, and I can remember quite a long way back. And so every year there's something interesting going on, and every year there's something good for you to take away. We're going to find a lot about using critical thinking today, and with our speaker and the panel coming up. But please, take a look at all of the other things that's going on today as well around here that you might be interested in. So we have a lot of stuff going on. I know Nanda's going to tell you about some more kinds of interesting events. But once again, on behalf of Western, thanks for coming today. Really appreciate it. And let me pass the mic over to the director of the Teaching Support Center, Nanda.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Welcome. As we start, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are here today on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Lenni Lenape peoples. Very grateful for the opportunity to gather and talk about teaching and reflect on the role of critical thinking in our work, thinking about how we're preparing our students to become engaged citizens who can engage both with their disciplines and with difficult critical ethical questions in their careers and in their lives after graduation. Critical thinking has been very important throughout history, but I think now is a time when it's particularly important or has come to the forefront again at the present time. So I hope that you'll find lots of examples relevant to your disciplines today and walk away with great strategies that you can try to implement in your teaching starting in the fall. As Mike said, during the day, in addition to our wonderful keynote speaker and the panel on critical thinking, we have a number of other sessions for you. Our e-learning team and colleagues from Western Technology Services will lead you through some OWL upgrades if you're interested. Mike, along with Dr. Ken Meadows and Tom Haffey, will lead a session on flourishing in your teaching. So if you'd like to take the opportunity to reflect on how to keep balance and flourish in your work, you can join them after lunch at 1:30 in one of the rooms upstairs. My colleague Aisha Haq and I are facilitating a session on facilitating learning in diverse classrooms and introducing a model for intercultural teaching competence, if you're interested, again after lunch. And then finally, we're very proud to announce that we have a new purple guide that we have just finished and published on working with TAs at Western. So if you work with one TA or a team of TAs, please join Dr. Karen Olson, who will be here to lead you through some case studies and working with TAs and share our new purple guide with you at the end of the day. So I don't want to take too long, so without further ado, I just wanted to introduce our keynote speaker. Garfield Gini-Newman is an associate professor at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. He's also worked with UBC and with York University and consulted around the world from the Middle East, Europe, and Asia on critical thinking at every level of education, from elementary, high schools, and higher ed. So he will be able to share examples of how instructors engage students in critical thinking throughout their learning careers, as well as strategies for how to assess critical thinking and provide opportunities for students to demonstrate critical thinking in those disciplines. He's brought his book with him today. He's the author of Creating Critical Thinking Classrooms. We do have copies in the library, so you'll have a chance to check those out after the session. Run as fast as you can. They might already be checked out. But please join me in welcoming Garfield Gini-Newman.
Thank you. Good morning. So a few weeks ago, I was in Greece at my nephew's wedding. Married in a small town in Greece. And my sister, when we got to the wedding, they had been to the Acropolis earlier. My background's in history, by the way, which will be important to this story. I met my sister. She had been to the Acropolis. I said, "What'd you think?" She said, "It's a pile of rocks. I don't care." And I thought, it's a pile of rocks? It's the birthplace of democracy. It's all this. I thought somewhere along the way, we failed to ignite passion and wonder, at least from a historical sense, that you saw rocks, I saw society, I saw a richness of the past. And I've been thinking about this. I'm doing a TED Talk later this year, and my focus is going to be what is the relevance of schools in a digital world. And I'm going to start with two concerns. One concern is, if we think our job is content delivery, the internet's a lot more efficient. If I'm just going to pump content out, there are probably better ways to do it that are a lot less expensive. On the other hand, if we're going to go down this road of discovery, let kids learn what they want, they also may as well sit at home, because I don't need to go to school to just sit at a computer to explore what I want. So where does that leave schools? And my central argument is going to be to teach, first of all, to inspire awe and wonder, to open doors that kids have never thought about. You know how many of our high school students come to you and you open up whole new worlds to them that we don't even offer in high school? And suddenly, and my wife's doctoral work was in economics. She hadn't taken an economics course until she got to university, and suddenly this whole new discipline opened up before her, and she was hooked. So it strikes me that part of our job is to inspire that kind of awe and wonder that has kids, as adults, wanting to travel the world, wanting to read authors they haven't read, wanting to understand things. But the second part, and this is what I want to talk about today, aside from inspiring awe and wonder, how do I help kids to think deeply about what they're learning? To me, that's the real function, the real role of schools, is not just to excite me, but to help me learn how to think deeply, to know how to understand information, what to trust, how to use it. I wanted to start this morning, I want to show you a video. My daughter is beginning her 4th year. She's in a neuroscience program at U of T. I want to show you a video she was showing, and some of you may be familiar with this. This is a video she was showing at the beginning of a course. Let's show you a couple of minutes of it, and I'll tell you about her response. But just watch a few minutes of this. Thank you. Sorry, forgot the mute part. Thanks. I'm going to stop there. You get a sense. I can tell you, our daughter came home and she said, oh, I was just enthralled with that video. She just loved it. But what I was more interested in is how the professor used that video. It was the beginning of a biology course, first day. She shows this video, 7 or 8 minutes, and she asks the students, how many cellular processes can you find in that video? Okay? And then she said, if you understand my course, you'll find 16 by the end of this course. I asked my daughter, how many could you find? She said, 3 or 4. So this is our diagnostic baseline. What do my students who are starting this course already know? What could they find there? And I want to tell you, for my daughter, after every lecture, she'd rewatch the video, and she'd go, yes, 2 more. Right? She was self-regulating. She was monitoring her learning. I've got 2 more. OK, I'm understanding this. By the end of the course, by the way, the professor showed this halfway through and showed at the end again. Now how many can you find? Notice what she did is she launched the learning with an invitation to show what you know and to start the thinking right off the bat. Now, every time I teach, you should be able to find some more evidence. You should be able to build your response. As opposed to, I'm going to teach you for the next 4 months, and in the last week, I'll show you that video and see how many you can find. I love the way she launched the course by inviting them to think throughout the course and allowing my daughter to self-regulate in her learning. So I just wanted to show you that. It inspired awe and wonder, but then became the foundation to teach her to think about the biology she was learning. So I want to just touch on and use that as a bit of an introduction. Jeff Scott is an Australian researcher, and Jeff Scott went to universities around the world and gathered what seemed to be authentic, powerful assessments that were being used by professors around the world. And he distilled what he found in terms of what seems to be common around highly effective assessments that are being used in higher education. And here are 4 of the key things that he found that they shared across those assessments. That there were real-world challenges, that there were connections being made that had students needed to apply what they know in unique and problematic situations. So note that word, to problematize the learning. Here's a challenge for you of some kind that's authentic in nature, that's real-world. Nanda, in her opening comments, talked about that, finding those ways to engage kids in things that matter, that connect to the world. But there should be no clear solution. I don't currently hold the answer. It's not about getting inside my head to find out the answer that I hold. It's about you developing a possible answer, a reasonable response that need a resolution. That we break it down with sub-problems that help you arrive, and we'll talk about that a bit more. But in that example of the cells, each class is a sub-problem. Now go back and look at it again. So you've got this rich overarching problem broken down into more manageable sub-problems, each contributing to that broader understanding. And our focus in our assessment is on deep understanding and competence. So rather than being on recall of information, I'm looking for deep understanding. And I want to just touch for a moment on competence. But first, putting at the core, I'm here to stress, putting thinking at the core, just a couple of notes. Art Costa in the US, he said, although thinking is innate, skillful thinking must be cultivated. That's going to be one of my key messages here this morning. To be human is to think. We're all thinking. But are we skillful in our thinking? That has to be cultivated. That requires intentional, and we'll talk about that, intentional cultivation of quality thinking. Roland Case, who's my co-author and colleague and friend, said that students who passively receive information are far less likely to understand what they've heard or read about than students who have critically scrutinized, interpreted, applied, or tested information. In fact, extending that, Robert Sternberg, in some of his research, found even if I was using a content recall assessment, I just want to assess recall of information, students are more likely to remember what they've been taught if they were engaged in thinking about it when they learned it. It is a myth to assume that the transmission of information will be the best way for me to remember content. Even if all I want to do is assess content recall, I'm more likely to remember something I've had to think about when asked to recall. And I love Nell Nodding's note when she said, any subject, physics, art, auto repair, can promote critical thinking as long as we teach in intellectually challenging ways. So I love that notion. It's not the subject that gets at the critical thinking, it's the way we teach it. Any subject can engage thinking. It depends on how we teach it. So I want to just pause for a moment. And I want you to look at my statement. I'm going to invite you to share a thought with some people around you. Is this a valid contention to make? You can reject it, you can accept it, you can be somewhere in between. Teaching content should not be seen as the goal of education, but rather a necessary intellectual tool for solving problems, responding to provocative issues, or creating meaningful products or performances. Would you just take a minute and share some thoughts with people around you? Reject it, accept it, be in between. Teaching content should not be our goal, but it is a necessary intellectual tool. I'll just give you a couple minutes to share some thoughts on that. All right, I'm going to bring us back together. First of all, I was asked, I will leave my PowerPoint with Nanda, and it can be posted somewhere, so if you want to access, if there's anything useful in it, you can pull out, but I'll leave it, and they'll be on the website, okay? I'd love to get a little bit of feedback, agree, disagree, be in between on my contention that teaching content should not be our goal in education. Who would give me a response? Is it agree, disagree, with caveats?
My friend right here.
Well,
I actually agree with that because I actually take that approach when I'm teaching. So the example we were just discussing is I walk into lecture first day and say, or before that, in fact, I say, I want you to bring nutrition information from a package to lecture. And we're going to delve into it. How the hell did those numbers get there in the first place?
beautiful. Yeah, okay. Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
I fully agree with this statement. What I know today is 20% from what I learned at the university. 20%
Yeah.
university just gave me as a knowledge compared to what I know now. So the 80%, I learned it from outside, because I had the tools. And
Beautiful.
how
The tools to learn it. Okay. Comment?
No, I was thinking I'm going to be teaching beginning German.
Okay.
I basically have to teach the content, otherwise they're wasting their
Yeah.
time. But right from the start, I'm going to have them communicating.
Beautiful.
Very basic level. So I think it's more about the communication than the actual nitty-gritty of German that I have to teach.
Okay. I want to pick up on this. Oh, sorry. Comment up here, I think.
I was thinking that, and talking with my colleagues, content is a baseline a lot of times. It's like Wikipedia, it's a good place to start maybe, but you don't necessarily want to end there.
Beautiful.
Hoping to take that and then kind of expand on it. But with some disciplines, you need the content.
Okay, so let me ask you this question based on those comments. Is this statement arguing for or against teaching content? Is that a statement that's saying we need to teach content, or is it an argument against teaching content? Yeah. I am arguing we need to teach content. I have no doubt in my mind that my daughter cannot do what she needs to do in her science program if someone doesn't teach her the science to do it. You cannot think critically about something you know nothing about. Right? So I am in 100% agreement that we need to teach content. However, the end goal is the ability to use that content in meaningful ways. I want to suggest to you, absolutely we need to teach content. So our real challenge as educators, how do I teach content through a thinking approach? What I worry about is when we say content's important, and then we use transmissive practices to hand over information in which thinking is not involved. So our challenge, how do I teach the content necessary in a way that engages students in thinking about that content?
But the amount of content in each course should be reduced so I can have time to teach both the content and thinking.
Okay, so the comment here is that I think while in agreement that the amount of content we try to cover should be reduced so we can go deeper, not wider, and use it. And by the way, and I would suggest probably across disciplines that's going to be a bigger or smaller issue. I would guess in your creative writing course doesn't have as much content as a biology course. Would that be a fair assumption? I mean, I'm watching my daughter go through certain courses, and notice I use biology because it seems to be the one with the most massive amount of stuff. I want to tell you, she struggled first year with multiple choice exams. She figured out the trick to multiple choice exams. Now her marks are A's and A pluses in multiple choice. And she said, because I know how to reason through each one. She's come to realize multiple choice questions are not content recall questions. They're thinking questions. And she has to be able to reason through, to be able to reject, not just pick one. How do I know the other ones aren't? And as she reasons through, she increases the likelihood of being correct. Her ability to reason is what has saved her. Now, we'll come back to that, but I want to pick up on some of these. I'm going to start here. For those of you in education, how many of you have learned about Bloom's taxonomy somewhere along the way? Okay, so I'm going to be a bit heretical for a few moments. In the work we do in the Critical Thinking Consortium, we're not big fans of Bloom's taxonomy. So that's probably going to be a bit of heresy. Probably at OISE where I teach, I probably frustrate my students because by the time I see them, they've been told to use Bloom's taxonomy, and I tell them I'm not really a big fan. So let me tell you why. First of all, Benjamin Bloom, in defense of Bloom, created the taxonomy as an assessment typology. It was intended to be, you need to understand the framing of your question and what the cognitive demands of that question are if you're going to fairly assess. You need to know, is that essentially a recall question, or is there some synthesis required, or is that an evaluative question? If you don't understand the demands of the question and you're assessing for content recall but actually required more than that, you have an unfair assessment. So he created it as a way to look at our assessments. But we've tended to adopt it as a pedagogical approach. And as a pedagogical approach, it presumes that, by the way, notice, and I will use air quotes whenever I say this, low order and high order thinking. I'd suggest to you there's no such thing as low order and high order. There's either thinking or you're not thinking. Most things people label as low order are simply thoughtless tasks. If I put up a note and ask you to copy the notes, is that low order thinking? I would argue there's no frontal lobe activity going on at all. And by the way, now when kids take pictures of that slide, how much frontal lobe activity is going on when I take a picture of your slide? How about we just call that thoughtless or thoughtful? Okay? By the way, notice as we work our way up. So Bloom's taxonomy presumes that you impart content. And then we get kids to start thinking about it. And eventually, and by the way, when you get to the top, we'll have you evaluate. The 2001 version puts grade at the top. By the way, any of you working in a field where creativity matters, doesn't it concern you that creativity is the end at the top, not driving the learning? I want to suggest to you that rather than seeing this kind of structure that has us moving up, thinking should be at the core of learning. It shouldn't be the pinnacle. It shouldn't be what we do at the end. It should be where we start the learning. By the way, I just want to give you a quick high school insight. In this province, in high school, we have 4 areas of the achievement chart. Any of you as parents see this come home on student work that you see? Knowledge, understanding, and so on. So in our 4 achievement, we have knowledge, understanding, thinking, application, and communication. And I ask teachers all the time, can anyone in this room tell me how a child shows understanding in the absence of thinking? Because I've yet to know how you would demonstrate understanding of a concept without having to think about the concept. Can you tell me how you would apply that learning in the absence of thinking? Because I'm not sure how you do that. How do you communicate effectively without thinking about purpose and audience? Right? In other words, thinking is at the core of everything we do. Rather than making it one of 4 areas, I would suggest you thinking should underpin everything we assess. Communicating effectively, as mentioned. Well, what's your criteria for effective communication? Right? That thinking is the foundation. By the way, you won't see these kids, but we have applied an academic in grade 9 and 10. What do? We change the verbs. So the academic kids analyze, assess, evaluate, and the applied kids describe. Anyone have a problem with that? In a 21st century classroom, we're saying some kids, despite the fact you're going to vote, and that can create certain problems. I'll try not to get political here. Despite the fact you're going to hold a job, perhaps raise a family, but you don't really need to think. So I want to suggest you thinking is the very foundation of what we want to be doing with kids. And I think we need to move from what I call knowledge hierarchies. And by the way, what I mean by that, do you see this at the university level? If it's in the text, it must be true. Because it's certainly high school, but it's in the text. Right? But I saw it here. Did you question the source? Did you wonder about? Knowledge hierarchies are when our students assume that because some source presented it, therefore it must be true. Because you said it in a lecture, it must be true, I wouldn't challenge it. If you want thinking classrooms, then the students have to stop seeing whatever I tell them as some kind of truth that can't be challenged. Or the text. I was teaching a class once, it was a high school class, and I asked a question, and a student put up her hand, and she answered, and I said, yeah, but how do you know that? She said, well, it's in the textbook. I said, yeah, but how do you know the textbook got it right? Well, you wrote the textbook, right? I said, yeah, but I don't have time to research that stuff. I just made that up. She got really stressed. I said, I'm kidding. But stop assuming because I wrote something in text, it now can't be challenged. Right? Those are knowledge hierarchies. By the way, when we show a movie in class, how many times we show a movie and we have a worksheet for kids because whatever's in that film must be true. Well, what if it's not? How about we problematize film, problematize stories, and say, what in that can we challenge? What might an alternate view be? And that's a knowledge network. And the key with knowledge networks is putting that provocative question at the core of learning. So notice that launch with how many cellular processes can you find drives the course, not wraps up the course. That provocative question. By the way, I love the way you said, even in beginning German, we're going to start by communicating because our goal is by the end, you'll be able to do this. My goal is clear up front, and we're going to work towards it in every class. In every class, you can get a little better at it. And you'll notice it's a more dynamic, organic process when we get into critical inquiry. Thinking about that question, I might reflect on what I already know and then share that with others. Or maybe I reflect and I do some further investigation. I begin constructing a response and then I share. This idea of inquiry puts the question, the provocation at the core and then begins to explore that issue. And that investigation may be your class. It may be the lecture. By the way, I love this interesting book David Weinberger wrote called Too Big to Know about 3 or 4 years ago. Too Big to Know is a book about living in a digital world where there's so much information available at our fingertips. And Weinberger argues that we can't be an expert in any one thing. There's so much information. I love his subtitle, that the smartest person in the room is the room. And for Weinberger, that room is not defined by these walls. It could be a virtual space. If you have a complex problem to solve, the best way to do it is to put your head together with other people who are thinking about those issues. That idea of that collaborative, the importance of collaborative thinking. So I want to dig in a little bit because we're throwing around this term critical thinking, but we were chatting in the hall learning. You said, everybody, by the way, it's hard to find an educator at any level who doesn't value thinking. Teachers just don't say, no, I don't want my kids thinking. Right? We do. We just don't agree on what it means. Okay? And there's confusion as to what it means. So I wanted to show you, this was a study done by Richard Paul about 20 years ago in California. And Richard Paul, who passed away last year, surveyed professors at universities across California, so Stanford, UCLA, and so on. And he asked them about critical thinking. And here's what he found. 89% of the faculty, as I said, you valued critical thinking. They said it should be a primary educational objective. But when pressed on what does it actually mean, only 19% could give a clear meaning. Okay? So 89%, it's important, 19% could explain what it meant. 78% acknowledge that their students lack the criteria they needed to be able to assess their thinking, but when asked, only 8% could enumerate the criteria their students should use. 82% involved students thinking critically at least once per class, but only 15% required it in writing. And lastly, 77% of the faculty had little or no idea how they could cover the content they needed to cover while fostering critical thinking. Now, 3 of those actually came from Richard Paul's study, 1 I made up. So here's your challenge. Talk to someone beside you, see if you can figure out which of those is the false statement. Which did I make up? And your 2 clues. Which of those 4 statements does not match my title, does not fit with my title? And kind of like Sesame Street, 3 of those belong together, but 1 just doesn't belong. Which doesn't fit with the other 3? Take a minute, see if you can figure out which statement I made up. How many of you picked the first one? How many of you think I made up the first statement? Hands up if you think the first one is the false statement. No takers. Okay. How about the second one? How many think I made up the second? A few of you. How many of you think I made up the third statement? A lot of you. And the fourth? Okay. So those of you who said the third, I think with a larger group, you were right. How do you know the third statement I made up? What gave it away?
Well, because studying how professors do, usually they want it in writing so that they can see it. It's much more prevalent.
Okay, so that 15% required in writing seems low given what you're understanding. Okay, give me another way you thought that one doesn't seem to make sense.
In the same way, but opposite. 15% sounds too high to require writing in lecture.
So I could engage you in a critical thinking in the middle of my lecture, but you didn't have to write it to be thinking. Okay, yeah.
I was looking at it at the top, it talks about valuing critical thinking, and just the way the statement was phrased didn't appear to be absolute value.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with that topic. Thank you.
Well, I think it matched with the valued it because they attempted to do it in class, but there wasn't the misunderstanding. It just talked about writing.
So that doesn't fit. Were some of you playing with the numbers saying, but if 89% don't know what it means, how can 82% be doing it? By the way, I use this as an example to show you that even in a large room, I just engaged you in critical thinking around something as simple as note-taking. Remember I said to you note-taking? If I said just copy this down, there'd be no thinking going on. You would just simply copy it down. All I did was problematize a slide and said there's a false statement up there. Can you find it? And I just created a critical thinking opportunity. I wanted to show you that's how simple critical thinking can be embedded in an ongoing way. I got you thinking about it. By the way, really interesting to me, I said to you a couple of times, turn and talk to someone, and yet at the beginning there was relative quiet in the room. Why? What were you doing? Okay. And how many of you were rereading the statements? Even though I read them to you one at a time. And you paid attention to me, but notice if I didn't problematize this, you would have simply accepted what I said, wrote it down, we move along. How many times as a student you put a note up, it must be true, the professor posted it, so I can just write it down and keep going. Don't question it, don't think about it. But by giving you a problem, saying there's a false statement, see if you can find it, I added 2 minutes into my lecture, turned apart and see if you can find the false statement. I can problematize my lecture. By the way, an alternative to that, I put up 6 statements, all true. But you're only allowed to write 4 down, which 2 are true, at least important. Just because I wrote it down and it's true doesn't make it important. If the question we're trying to solve is X, here are 5, 6 facts. Which ones would you cross out as least helpful in answering our question? What I'm trying to show you is I can problematize something as simple as note-taking, moving what we traditionally see as a low-order task and suddenly infusing thinking. I want thinking to be routine in my class. It's what we do every day.
How do you eliminate or reduce the possibility that a student now has a false memory or memory that reinforces a false idea?
So that they focus on, that's the piece I remember. Great question. First of all, any thoughts from others about that potential problem of that number 3 now being the one that sticks? Thought, yeah. So to reinforce the 3 ones that they would have picked, have conversation about those, what is the implication. So we need, I mean, it's a good caution you're raising that doesn't become the one. I will tell you, my daughter tells me in multiple choice, I don't know if you do this, but she tells me in her science course at U of T, if there is something like that is likely to be misunderstood, if you have she'll say, if you have a surface understanding, they'll put that answer on to grab the people who have done a surface review. And she said, I've learned to watch for those, because the ones that you would, oh yeah, I remember that. And then she reads past it and goes, I have to get deeper. So one of the things I think too is to remind them, be careful, make that transparent, that there's a potential problem. The book that was mentioned on creating thinking classrooms, what we mean by this in the work that we've been doing, we're defining a thinking classroom as 2 sides. And it sounds simple, but rather, we think, profoundly important. A thinking classroom is where students learn to think and think to learn. And what we mean by that is the most powerful way kids will learn is when they're engaged in thinking about what you want them to learn. Okay? So problematizing, as I've been demonstrating, helps us to remember the information better, helps create that deeper understanding. But that means we have to teach students how to do the thinking. So there's 2 sides to it. Have we given kids the intellectual tools, nurtured those tools that allow them to do that rich thinking? Have we created the opportunities? And I want to touch on both of those. But first, just a pause. There's a lot of talk in education these days around competence versus skills. And I just wanted to raise that, because I had earlier had a slide that talked about deep understanding and competence. And so a lot of the conversation is moving away from a focus on skills to a focus on competence. And I just want to try to offer a little bit of clarification that a competency is a constellation or a collection of related skills in an area. Being a good reader requires that I can decode words, that I can infer. There's a variety of skills connected to being a competent reader. Being a competent researcher would be an assemblage of a variety of skill sets that come together to help make that a competence. So notice it's having a variety of skills, but I don't use them in a constellation or in a range doesn't make me competent. I partly mention this because it's a misnomer. We've fought this for 25 years. Critical thinking is not a skill. By the way, by definition, a skill is something that resides in the motor cortex of the brain. Learning to ride a bike is a skill. Once you've mastered riding a bike, there's no frontal lobe activity. Would you agree? You get on the bike and you go. When a young child is learning to write cursive, they're thinking. There's a lot of frontal, because they think about it. As you master it, it moves to a different part of the brain so that you can access that information quickly. Learning a language. Over time, it's not in the frontal lobe now. I use it just naturally, right? So skills, once mastered, move to a different part of the brain. Thinking is always frontal lobe. Thinking is a competence that requires an ability to do a variety of things together. So is creativity. Creativity is a competence. It's not a skill. It's not like I can teach you a couple of things and, oh, now you're skilled in creativity, right? It's a competency we want to nurture. Now, I want to try this out. I want you to tell me, this is a picture of London, Ontario in 1950. Your challenge, I want you to tell me the month, the day of the week, and the approximate time of day this photograph was taken. Month, day of the week, and the approximate time of day. Use all the clues you can find. Don't ignore evidence if it doesn't fit. See if you can come up with the month, day of the week, time of day. Let's talk with each other, give you a few minutes. Shout out for me what month this is. What month is this? September. June. May. Anyone want to fill in July, August in there? So we're May, June, September. Did I hear in October? Oh, so May, June, September. How about the day of the week? Let's start with, is it a weekday or a weekend? I think I just heard a divide there. All right, Saturday? Sunday? Not Sunday? Weekday. Okay? What time, approximately, within about an hour? Okay, I'm going to come back to that because some of you are pointing at the clock and going, duh, it's 10 to 12. We'll come back to that. I want you to know when we do an exercise like this with students, I want them to what we want to get them accustomed to is observation, inference, and conclusion, which is consistent across learning. When you read text, what did you read on the line, between the line, what conclusions can you draw? When you do an experiment, what did you observe, what did you infer to reach your conclusion? A lot of times students want to give you one or the other. They don't give you the evidence, they give you their inference, or they give you the other way around. So I want to challenge you to give me some evidence. Why do you think this is May, June, or September? Give me some evidence, support it with your inference.
The shadows are long shadows, and at noon you have short shadows in the summer.
Okay, so you're starting, if that clock is right, and it is noon, and those shadows are long, this must be into the fall.
Or in the spring.
Okay, now what leads you to say September and not November? Oh, good. I hadn't seen that before. Good. Yeah, welcome Western University students. Good job. Did you post that?
I actually hacked it.
Hacked it into the picture. Because I don't think that was there last night when I put this in. All right. So, makes it September. Does other evidence support that? So you've got the long, say, I think this is later into the fall, but not too late. You're saying, well, that sign tells us. Does anything else support that it appears to be September, not November? What about the clothes? Okay, so they're wearing coats. So this doesn't look like July. It'd be too hot in July. So why not November? They're not wearing heavy enough. It would be colder. So they're dressed in a way that suggests a fall day. All right. How about the day of the week? We had an interesting debate there, whether it was Sunday or not Sunday, weekend or weekday. And you were pretty adamant it's a weekday. Yes. How come?
Because there's a large crowd, because a lot of them appear to be dressed for work.
Okay. So someone want to, sorry, I heard something about church.
It's most likely they come from some restaurant as a group of people, or they're almost similarly dressed and similarly walking together, stopped at the corner, got a red light to cross.
A group from work maybe heading out to lunch, something like that. Okay, someone want to make the case for the weekend? And so if it is September, students are coming back, you should be in school, suggesting weekend. How about Saturday or Sunday? Because I had a pretty strong, it's not Sunday, and somebody said, no, I think it is Sunday. What?
We could tell if the shop was open with like Sunday shopping.
Okay, okay. Okay, and was there Sunday shopping in 1950? So if the store is open or closed, okay, so that, huh?
My first impression was it must be Sunday, and it's because the ladies are wearing very,
Okay.
they're dressed up, and my impression is they're all coming home from church, which is why they're all out.
Okay, so they're coming home from church and they're well dressed or in their Sunday best coming home from church. Okay. No gloves. Would you think in the 1950s they would have had gloves? Interesting. Okay, fine.
I would say in the 50s you worked until on Saturday and everyone's coming out.
Oh, interesting. So they're finishing up work Saturday at noon, heading home. Okay, let me ask one last question. How do you know the clock works? What other evidence in the picture? By the way, this is what I want to say. Even if I have a clock, the question I still want to ask students, what evidence do you have that the clock is working? The direction of the shadows? Fits? Where's the second clock? Oh, up top there. And the probability that both have stopped working is fairly low. Okay, interesting. Okay? At the same time. Okay, wonderful. Okay, should I give you the answer now? Could you just take a minute and share a reason with someone beside you, if you did an activity like this in a first class and so on, why should we not give students the answer if you do an activity like this? Take a minute. Why should we not give the answer? Give me a reason I should not give the answer. What would be a reason you should not give the answer? So why invest the energy, right? You're just going to tell me anyway. So if I give the answer, then the routine in the classrooms, the teacher has it. Great. Give me another reason I should not.
No pain, no gain.
Okay. So I don't have to think about it. Why else? Why should I not?
It implies only one correct answer.
Okay, so as if I'm a holder of that answer, and there's one answer, and you're trying to get it out of me, right? So I assume you're saying there could be multiple responses to that. Okay? Why else?
You're also modeling what it's like in the field as a researcher when you don't necessarily know the answer. You're making the evidence, you're making the inferences.
I'm so glad you just gave me that out to be able to tell you that I don't know the answer. That is. By the way, I want to pick up on what you just said for a moment. See, I actually misled you intentionally. I said, should I give you the answer? I don't know the answer. It's online. It didn't record what I asked you. And I love the fact that you said in research, how many times you set out to find the answer. What I should have asked is, should I offer a reasonable answer? See, I want to suggest to you in our classrooms, in our lectures, in our work we do with students, we shouldn't be in pursuit of the right answer as much as what would be a reasonable or sound answer. My wife's work is in math and critical thinking, and she will say to you, I am less interested in students getting the correct answer. I am more interested in the mathematical reasoning that lies behind that. If you make an arithmetic error but the reasoning is sound versus the correct answer and no idea how you got there. Now, by the way, sound reasoning is more likely to lead you to a correct answer. Okay? But our primary interest is what would be plausible or reasonable, which then opens up that range of answers of possibility. And very few times do we have the answer. Sorry, comment at the back. Beautiful. And by the way, if I pick up on that, imagine if I used whatever image you want that you could be using. And I ask students to give me an answer now, and then we park it. And 2 weeks from now, I'm going to put it back up. And in light of any new learnings, anyone change their mind? Anyone have a better answer? I can use this as a vehicle to engage their thinking, but I can't if I give the answer. It's over. Thinking stops.
Lloyd Alexander summed this up in a quote where they said, we learn more from an answer and not finding it than we do from looking for the answer to the question and getting it. So the idea is the process.
Yeah, beautiful.
Not the response.
Yeah, and the ability to defend.
As a matter of fact, I've used that. As a matter of fact, that's one of the questions I used for my introductory essay in my course to allow them to critically think about things.
Beautiful. One of my students, one of my grad students a couple of years ago, working in elementary math, he said the problem we have in schools, we don't focus enough on justification in elementary math. The kids need to learn how to justify. It's that process. We put too much on getting to the answer and not enough on the justification. And then when they get into higher grades and into higher education, they really struggle because justification hasn't underpinned the thinking that they're doing. Yes?
I don't want to hear alternative facts and people telling me that. I don't know.
No, this is very good. By the way, this is this alternative facts question that's coming up. And this is, I think, to say, look, you can't just make up anything you want to say about this picture. Notice I was using the word reasonable or sound response, grounded in evidence. What I'm looking at. Now, if you start to make up something and you can't support it, because I think one of the big dangers is people think that, well, if you're going to open up the thinking, then I can say what I want. No, a critically thoughtful response isn't whatever you feel like saying. Right? It is grounded in evidence. It is grounded in some factual information. It can be defended. So I mean, it's a great point. We have to actually, I even more teach very directly too. How do we avoid fake news? I mean, I think there is a government somewhere in this hemisphere that is grounding an entire presidency on, well, whatever I feel like this morning. Right? But I said I wouldn't politicize things. Oh, I love that. So what additional information, what additional source might help me? And I love the way you say to assert with confidence, which doesn't mean I absolutely know with certainty, but I love that assert with confidence is a really nice way to put that. Thank you. And then how do we then access, let's go. Notice we've launched into inquiry. By the way, I want to show you just a couple of quick things. One of the reasons I use this, I just use a black and white photo, and if I asked you on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being this is the most riveting picture you've ever seen, and 1 being it's the most boring picture you've ever seen, and 10 is the most riveting, where would you put this image? Is everyone on the lower end of my scale? Okay. By the way, the image isn't necessarily that riveting. But when I problematized it, I had you looking for details. To find that sign welcoming university students, there are 2 clocks, there's a little boy. You began to look for details. Because I problematized the image, I got you to pay attention to detail, to explore possibilities. And I want you to think about the collaborative process. As you shared those responses, how many of you found yourself going, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. Oh, that's a good point. We were working together, coming up with a richer response. And I did it with a visual that I could engage all the students in the conversation. I also was using this as a very small, we call this additive teaching. I began with the picture, and then I suddenly brought in some new information. In my class, I might start with an image, or whatever I'm starting with. I don't front-end load all the information. I get them thinking, then I pause, add a little more information. How does that impact what you're thinking? What if I told you it was the southeast corner, and does that impact on the time of day and so on? So additive teaching, launch with the provocation, add more details as they're working through it to deepen their learning. Sorry, comment or question?
I did want to make a comment that this exercise, what I took away from it the most is something totally different, which is that reasonable minds looking at the same evidence could come to different conclusions.
Absolutely.
Based on the idea of what you said is certain confidence. That, like for me, I'll tell you, I didn't bother looking at the clocks. I started by looking at those shadows. I had this at more like 9 o'clock in the morning because I could see the clocks.
Right, yes.
Because those shadows really are long. And I'm even left wondering now, at this instant, is it possible that at noon, that those shadows could be that long on anyone here?
Yeah, great. And by the way, notice that brings in now, well, if I have more understanding of the sun and where it is, like that's not my expertise, but others in the room might say, well, no, because this shifting. But you see, it brings in different information, perspectives. But I love the way you said, and I'm still wondering, could it actually be that long? What additional information do I need? Wonderful. Now, I wish I could, I want to just move into this a little bit. I said earlier, critical thinking, everyone values, but we don't necessarily agree on what it is. So I'm going to offer our definition that we work with in the Critical Thinking Consortium. But critical thinking, first of all, I should say up front, we find that often our students have a misunderstanding of critical thinking. They often think that critical thinking comes from the root to criticize, to be critical of. That's the wrong root. Critical thinking does not mean to be critical or to criticize. It does not mean to be on the attack. It actually it comes from the Greek word meaning criteria or criterial thinking. All critical thinking is thinking grounded in the face of criteria, that I'm making reasonable judgments in light of criteria and evidence. And so there are 2 key components to any, what we would call a critical thinking task. One is the invitation to assess or judge the merits of the options presented in light of relevant factors or criteria. So I gave you criteria, a sound answer. Make sure you pay attention to all the evidence. Don't ignore clues if they don't fit. I was giving you some criteria. You were gathering evidence, weighing that evidence, reaching a conclusion. So critical thinking is inviting our students to make thoughtful judgments. I should just for a moment, I've at times had people say to me that Paulo Freire, for example, would look at critical pedagogy that leads to taking action. And I didn't hear you say taking action. So I want to just clarify one piece. There's a difference between critical thinking and critical pedagogy. Paulo Freire and others start from the presumption that there is an injustice, there is something that needs a resolution to, and we need to think about that and how we're going to resolve that. We would argue that is one step ahead of where we want to start students in thinking, because I've already told you there's a problem, that there's an injustice, and your job is to take action to solve it. We want to present students with the evidence to say, identify the problem. So it's not that we're in disagreement with critical pedagogy, it's that critical thinking is inviting students to look at evidence to determine where the issues lie, and then decide what action to take. So it's a step before, not me imposing that there's a problem, but presenting the evidence for you to weigh to determine a problem. So let me just, TC squared, by the way, any math colleagues in the room? So I'm going to offer my apologies, because TC squared stands for the Critical Thinking Consortium, TCTC. And my wife always tells me, that's not TC squared, that's TC bracket 2. And I have to say, well, it just doesn't work as well, so we're going to go with the math error. So my apologies for the misuse of math. Our definition, our approach to critical thinking, is it's inviting students to think through a problematic situation. So note, Mike, and I've said this a few times, problematizing the learning, finding a way, whether it's a lecture or a bigger issue. How do I problematize the issue so kids have to think about it? Where they have to think about what to believe or how to act, making a reasoned judgment that reflects competent use of the intellectual tools, which I want to touch on. So this is the framework that we developed about 25 years ago on creating a thinking classroom. And let me just give you a little bit of context. About 25 years ago, the BC government had released a new curriculum, and they approached 4 professors at the time to say, could you help develop materials to support this new curriculum with critical thinking at the core? And those original 4 said, well, we can take that money, but we don't want to just create a bunch of resources and then put them on the shelf and done. They used the money to research everything they could about critical thinking and teaching through a critical thinking approach, and try to come up with a comprehensive model that brought together the best research we could find. And this is the model that emerged. One is, how do we create the climate? How do you create the classroom environment where thinking is valued? By the way, if students sense that the way I do well in your class is to feedback answers that you already have, then they'll play that game. Right? How many of you have seen the Harry Potter movies? See, I would argue they are not good critical thinking classrooms. Why not? Who answers all the questions? Hermione. She's read the book. They tend to be recall questions, and she can answer them. What do the rest of the students do? When a question gets asked, what do you do if you're not Hermione?
You wait for Hermione.
Exactly. Keep your mouth shut, your hand down. Hermione will take this, and we can all move on. If my classroom is a place where there's a handful of smart students who answer most of my questions, the rest of my class learns to keep their mouth shut, let them answer the questions, and we can all move along. You'll notice in my talk, I've already a few times to turn and talk to one other person. Okay? Try to engage that. By the way, I was very intentional when I said to you, here are 4 things about critical thinking, the professors from California, and I said one of those is a false statement. It was very purposeful on my part when I asked you, how many of you picked 1? How many of you picked 2? If I would have said, so which is the false answer, and you put up your hand and you say number 2, now I'm stuck having to go, no, you're wrong. Okay, next. Well, that's not creating a thinking classroom. Okay, next time I'm not taking that risk. I intentionally said hands up if you picked 1, 2, 3, 4, which allowed me then to go, well, those of you who picked 3, you were right. How did you know? So notice what I was doing is creating that safe space. You took a chance. If you didn't get it, I was directing my follow-up question to one who did. Let me hear your reasoning. That's trying to create a climate of thinking. By the way, when I say to you, I don't know the month, day of the week, time of day, and I'm okay with that. I'm trying to model that, we're in this, we're together, we're exploring this. So how do we shape our environment? We're going to focus a bit on how do you create the opportunities, how we frame our questions, how we frame our tasks. Are they inviting a critically thoughtful response, or are they inviting just a regurgitation of information? So we're going to touch on that. But I do want to pause for a moment. If you just do the top 2, you won't advance thinking much in classrooms. The top 2 say, well, in our classroom I feel safe and I feel I can take risks and so on. And we're asked good provocative questions that push my thinking. But if you don't give me the tools to do that thinking, you won't necessarily see better thinking. And notice our beginning of this talk, I talked to you about teaching content, because the first tool is background knowledge. And as I already said, you can't think critically if you don't know what. But notice my challenge comes first. The provocation drives the learning. And now if you're going to engage in this, you're going to need to know about, and this is where the lectures, the readings, I need to build your background knowledge. But you'll know, how many of you use case studies in your teaching? And my guess is the case precedes the learning. Is that often the case? I'm going to give you the case study. And my lectures now, my daughter was doing an advanced math course. The problem was given up front. Why does she go to a lecture? Because every lecture is going to help her get into that problem deeper and deeper. She could choose not to go, and she'd probably struggle with that problem. But the problem drove the learning. The lecture then supported the exploration of it. So notice what I'm promoting is, if we can give kids that case study, that problem, that issue to grapple with up front, every time I teach a lesson, a lecture, a reading, a seminar discussion, it's building the background. And by the way, we need to teach our students, and it's okay that your first attempt at that didn't work. Because the reality in research is, if you go out and do the research, hey, that's the answer I wanted right off the bat, you're probably not doing sound research. How many times do you find that the research takes you in a direction, oh, I didn't anticipate that. I've got to wrap my head around this. By the way, notice the second. And we've touched on criteria. These are the two pillars of all critical thinking. I need something to think about, content, data, facts, and I need criteria to help me make my decision. Those are the two pillars of all critical thinking. Third one, critical thinking vocabulary. By this, I do not mean content knowledge. So throw out a science term for me. Photosynthesis. If I don't know what photosynthesis is, that's background knowledge that needs to be built. When we talk about critical thinking vocabulary, if I don't know the difference between conjecture, a prediction, if I don't know what these words mean, do any of you have students at the university level who actually don't understand the question? They understand the content. They're struggling with what I meant by my question. Because sometimes they don't understand the vocabulary of thinking. And sometimes we have to unpack with them. Look, when you're asked to evaluate in math and evaluate in English, those are use of the word in different ways. So making sure they understand. I'm going to try, if I get some time, I'll show you some thinking strategies. How do we help students take background knowledge, connect it so they arrive at thoughtful decisions? And we work with 18 habits of mind. I want you to note habits. You cannot teach a habit. You nurture habits. So I'll just give you an example. Empathy is a habit. You don't teach a lesson on empathy and then be surprised the next day that the students didn't show empathy because I taught you that yesterday. That means I know the meaning of the word. I might be able to recognize it in someone else. If you want me to be empathetic, you have to nurture that over time. The photo I used was a good example of getting you to work on attention to detail. If I want my students to pay attention to detail, then I'm going to use a variety of activities over time that help them reinforce that need to slow down, look closely at. One of the number one habits in all the research for people to be successful in life is perseverance. Do any of you encounter first-year students where if they're not doing well by midterm, they bail? If they haven't learned perseverance, they quit when it's getting hard. And by the way, I'm going to tell you, we've got lots of students coming out of high school who've always gotten A's. And they get to university, and suddenly they don't get an A. Right? I'll tell you quick, my daughter, first-year biology class, there was 1,800 students in it, Convocation Hall. Do you know how many were left at Christmas? 600. Right? 2/3 dropped by Christmas. You don't get into U of T science program if you're not 85 or up coming out of high school. So these are all A students coming out of high school. Right? 2/3 have dropped by Christmas. Why? By the way, I told you, my daughter struggled C's and D's throughout the first term. I would argue it was her perseverance, because she came home one day with another low mark, and she said, Dad, I'm not going to let them beat me. I'm going to figure this out. Right? And she worked at it. It was her perseverance. By the way, just as an aside, our daughter's a ballet dancer. I'm going to suggest to you is the arts. You know how many times she was told in ballet, not good enough, not good enough, do it again. That's where she learned perseverance and resilience. Right? Some kids, it's in sports, it's in piano. Right? Not good enough, you're going to do it again. Right? But that's one of the habits. It's absolutely key to nurture. So I want to touch on this framing questions if we want to get at critical thinking. We talk about 3 types of questions in our work, and I'll just have some samples here. Take a look at all my questions on the left. What do you notice about those types of questions in what we call type 1? They're factual. Any other word you'd use to describe? Let me ask you this. Do I need to make a decision? No. Typically, how many correct answers are there? Okay. So let's just look it up, retrieve it, find it somewhere. What about when I move to type 2? How is type 2 different than type 1? It's an opinion. Do I need to make a decision? Yeah. How do I make that decision? Where does that decision reside? Internally. How many wrong answers are there? Yeah, you can't be wrong. You've asked me a preference question. I can say what I want, right? By the way, does everybody know what a Birdie Bot every flavor bean is? Those of you who read Harry Potter, they're little jelly beans that come in multiple flavors, and you don't know the flavor until you bite them. So you could get Tutti Frutti or Lemon Drop, or you might get black pepper, boogers, earwax, right? Let me ask you, if I brought a box in, because you can buy them in candy stores, and I had you try them, and you said, ooh, I really like the earwax, it's good. Are you wrong? Just strange, right? Like, if you like earwax, okay, I got to ask, this is a London question. I didn't know this until recently. How many of you like Thrills gum? Okay, I've got some smiles and hands, and I got to, oh, I hate it. Why do you hate it?
Oh, it's too sweet. It just tastes like village, something, a perfume.
A perfume? What else? Who else hates it? What's it taste like to you? Tastes like soap. Do you agree it tastes like soap? So now I'm wondering about, I'm wondering about your upbringing now and how you develop a liking for soap, right? By the way, notice here we have an agreement. It tastes like soap. Yeah, it does taste like soap, and I hate it, and you love it. That's a column 2. By the way, I said to you that was a London question because I was using this with a group in the US, and I said, how many of you like Thrills gum? And they all looked at me and didn't know what I was talking about, right? I said, and finally a woman in the front said, I'm from Canada. I know what you're talking about. I didn't realize that was a Canadian made here. Is OPG still? It's still here in London? They make the gum. I didn't realize, so now part of my Canadian identity is a Tim Hortons coffee and a piece of Thrills gum, right? Although Tim Hortons isn't owned anymore. But anyway, let's go to type 3. What do you notice about type 3? How are they different from 1 or 2? There's decisions. Okay. Okay, let me pick up on this for a moment. Would you accept more answers here than you would in type 1? So you would agree there's a wider range of possible answers. Would you accept as many answers in 3 as you would in 2? 2, you told me there's no wrong answers. Is there a limit on what you'd accept for 3? Now let me go back to where you said, what would put the limit? You were just saying.
Well, you have to have reasonable arguments. Why is your choice better than another choice?
Okay, what would help me create that, what we would call a reasonable argument? What would I have to have for you to see my argument as reasonable? Huh?
You would need to show that your thoughts behind it are useful, so they don't sound like garbage.
Okay.
You would have to prove with actual maybe sources.
Okay, so I'd have to have some evidence to back it up. What else do I need? Okay, and that's what I want to get at. Remember I told you the 2 pillars of all critical thinking is I have a set of criteria to guide that decision, and I have some evidence to back it up. A critical thinking question is grounded in criteria and evidence to make, when you're saying I need logic, I need a sound argument, I want to get at the crux of that is using criteria to make, so notice if I asked you, would your family's needs be better met in Berlin or London, I'm not asking if you'd rather, what's your preference, what are the needs would define the criteria. I would have to research each of the locations. In light of my criteria, even though I thought Berlin sounded really cool, London actually is a better fit for my family's needs. You'll notice using my criterion evidence, we make a judgment. Let me give you an example. Is this a 1, 2, or 3? Is Hamlet a sympathetic character in your eyes? 1, 2, or 3? Why 2? In your eyes. Is it meant to be a 1, 2, or a 3? It's supposed to be a 3. This is meant to be a judgment question. But when we stick in your eyes on the end, the students now think, oh, I get to tell you how I feel about it. Right? And it becomes a 2 now. By the way, notice in your eyes is not only redundant, it's not even helpfully redundant. Cross it out. Is Hamlet a sympathetic character? How many of your students, if I ask is Hamlet a sympathetic character, think it's a 1 now? They can say it's yes, no, that's all I have to write. Because if they do, they don't understand critical thinking. I put this on my exam. So we're 30% of your final exam. Do you write yes? Hopefully you realize, by the way, my point in that is anytime you see a question that requires you to make a judgment, is Hamlet a sympathetic character, is asking for a judgment. What we have to get our students to understand is anytime you see a question that requires a judgment, you need 2 things, which are, what do I need? Criteria and evidence, right? So is Hamlet a sympathetic character? Now, by the way, what do we often do? Cross out in your eyes. We don't want kids to answer yes, no. So what do we often do? What do we stick on the end of the question? Justify, defend. I'm going to tell you, I've seen too many students over the years when I put justify or defend get this rambling response that's not organized, that is not got a well-structured argument. What if instead we ask, is Hamlet a sympathetic character? Identify 3 criteria for sympathetic and use evidence from the text to support. Now the criteria becomes your organizing structure. First, I'm going to address, in the first section, I'm going to address this criteria using this evidence. It gives me a structure to work from. Defend your answer. If I'm struggling organizing my thinking, it doesn't help me. Let me show you another. Which of the theories used by scientists to explain the dinosaurs' disappearance from the face of the earth is most plausible? 1, 2, or 3? Tell me the key words. There's a couple things I think you could identify. How do you know it's a 3? What words tell you that? Yeah, so I know I'm having to make a judgment now. What else tells you and would help me in my decision? Most plausible. And the first thing I need to do now, identify criteria for a plausible theory. Right? And now what evidence? So if you're going to argue this has plausibility, what's the criteria for a plausible response? What evidence do you have to support? 1, 2, or 3? What are 3 methods of harvesting trees? Make it a 3. How would I change that question? Because right now it's just a recall. What do you do with that? What are the 3 best? And we'd have some criteria. Could you extend that? What if I wanted to look at multiple perspectives? Beautiful. And what if I asked, what's the most sustainable from an environmental lens? What if I asked, what's the most profitable? What if I'm looking at it through a labor lens and I want to know which one would be the safest? What if I had to develop a method of harvesting trees that best met the needs of all stakeholders, where I now have to consider different views? So notice how I can take that question and nuance it to bring in multiple perspectives, to challenge that cooperative lens that we look at. So at the core, and sorry, but you're getting a quick overview of this, when we look at the attributes of a critical thinking or task, when you look at when we give students questions, we look for 4 key things. Are there options for me to consider? Remember, at the core of critical thinking is this invitation to weigh options to make a decision. So when I look at the options, I put up that picture and I ask you to tell me the month, day of the week, time of day. It could have been one of 12 months. It could have been one of 7 days. It could have been one of 24 hours. You had options to consider. You're being asked to arrive at a reasoned judgment, okay? Making conclusions or decisions that are reasonable in light of the criteria and the evidence they can find. So 4 key things. Present a question that invites weighing of options, the reasoning through to reach a decision that allows for the application of criteria and the application of evidence. Now, I just have about 10 minutes. I want to show you, just to help in your work, we've identified in our work 6 prompts. There are 6 ways. Virtually anything you do in your class will take one of 6 forms if you're going to engage critical thinking. When I asked you to tell me the month, day of the week, and time of day, you were doing a decode the puzzle. So anytime in your class you want me to read text and look for the deeper meaning in the text or the main theme, I'm decoding. In your nutrition, if you're looking at and trying to say, is this healthy food, look at the data, you're decoding. You're looking for the evidence, you're weighing the evidence. When you look at images, doing an experiment and figuring out what is it telling us, you're decoding. So anytime students are having to come up with, justify a response to a problematic situation, they're decoding. We critique when I say, is this person an effective leader? Will Trudeau's splitting of the Indigenous portfolio into 2 be a helpful, if we want to critique that, we're taking one decision that was made by the government and we're weighing it, we're critiquing it. But judge the better or best is when I give you 2 or more. Which of these 3 decisions made by the government will be most helpful? Which of these 4 people would make the most effective leader? The NDP going through a leadership race is a judge the better or best. Who's going to be the most effective leader? Rework the piece. Take that diet you've been looking at. When you realize it's not as healthy as you thought, rework it. That diet that you're looking at needs to be modified for a diabetic. What changes would you make that would make it a healthy but still pleasurable diet for someone with this situation? Rework. If we change the situation, we were talking a bit earlier here about Renaissance literature. How many of you know James Blunt, the singer? You know the song Beautiful? And I was suggesting that it's a ripoff of Petrarch's poem. Is it called Laura? I just know Laura, isn't it? It's called Laura. Where Petrarch, sees a beautiful woman from a distance, but he never actually meets her. He falls in love. It's the ultimate justification for, loving the human. I said, well, James Blunt sees a woman at the subway, but he never actually talks to her. He just ripped off Petrarch. He reworked the piece. He said, West Side Story is a rework of the piece. Take Romeo and Juliet and set it in a modern context. Right? That's rework. When your students write a lab, write an essay. Anything they're going to hand into you is a design to specs. Have we given them clear criteria? A well-written lab has to meet these criteria. A well-written piece of poetry, what's the criteria we'd use to adjudicate? Unless it's a perform to specs. Perform to specs, when I'm planning my presentation, I'm doing a design to specs. I'm thinking about the audience, I'm thinking about my timing. When I'm up here, I'm performing to specs. I'm watching you, I'm seeing are people engaged, I'm watching the clock, how far am I going to get? We make all kinds of in-the-moment decisions when you teach. If your students are doing presentations for you, and they've been given a certain amount of time, they need to be thoughtful about that. By the way, I would suggest to you, writing an exam is a perform to specs. Students should learn to take exams as a critically thoughtful performance. Am I monitoring my time? Am I leaving myself enough time to check it over? Am I answering in depth? How thoughtful is my response? Let me show you just a few quick examples, and they're a bit playful, but you'll get the idea. The top line are all whammy knackers, but none of the middle line are whammy knackers. Are there any whammy knackers in the third line? Okay. Tell me what you know about, what do all whammy knackers share in common? Just shout out what about their legs? Sorry? 4 legs? 4 body parts? They all have tails. The 4 body parts are always the same shape. Okay. How come the first one on the middle row is not a whammy knacker? Too many body parts. How come the second one's not? Okay, what about the third one? It's got a head, a tail, 4 legs, 4 body parts. They're all the same shape. It meets all the attributes of a whammy knacker so far. Why is it not a whammy knacker? So are you saying the head has to match the body shape? Round head, okay. Anything else? Yeah. I can't go beyond, that's a whammy knacker. I don't know either. I want you to look at the colors. How is the third one in the middle different from the fourth one on the top? Where's the yellow spot? What can you tell me about all whammy knackers? The third body spot of all whammy knackers is red. Is this a whammy knacker? Is this a whammy knacker? Now, that's just a bit of a silly way. We call that concept attainment. That's a decode the puzzle. You had to look for clues and say, okay, I can find shared attributes, but I can also find the one piece, the anomaly in that helps me unlock. Let me show you what that might look like, and I'm using this. How many of you do not remember like terms from high school math? How many of you do not remember what a like term is in math? Perfect, you'll be my tester. If we were teaching the concept of like terms, this is the same approach. We would show one set at a time. 2A, 5A is a yes example. 2A, 2B is a no example. What can you tell me about like terms? What do they have to have? Look at my yes example. Look at my no example. Okay. And by the way, notice our opportunity to say to kids, and we call that a variable. The variable has to say the same, but the coefficient can be different. Does our rule still hold when you go to my second example? Okay. Can you tell me something new? Can be negative or positive. Can be a fraction or a whole number. Can be more than one variable, as long as those variables are the same. By the way, we're building a definition. How about the third one? Does our reasoning still hold? Is there something new you can tell me? Power has to remain the same. So notice you can have m's all the way across, but if the exponent changes, it changes that variable. We'll just do the last one, the fourth one down. So we're building our definition of like terms. Tell me one new thing that fourth set tells you. Order doesn't matter, except, what did you say it has to? Yeah, that exponent has to stay with the variable. The order doesn't matter as long as exponent. By the way, what I'm showing you this is at a high school level. This is teaching content. I said to you at the beginning, we need to find ways to teach content in a way that engages thinking. As a teacher, I could come in and I could put the definition on a slide or on the board. Here's the definition for a like term. Make sure you understand it and know it. Or I can say to the students, you're going to construct the definition by working through the yes and no examples. You can do this in language. We're going to look at rules. This fits the rule, this doesn't. You tell me the rule. I don't tell you the rule. Okay? We could be looking at different in poetry. These have certain form. These don't have that form. What's the common form here? We give them the label second. So notice we're teaching through examples and non-examples to help develop that conceptual understanding. It can be done at a very complex level or a very simple level. But the key idea is students uncovering rather than me telling the key attributes. I'm going to show you, I'm just trying to bounce around the subject areas. If we ask students, this is from a textbook used in the US, and this is the caption. In June 1775, British troops attacked American forces defending Bunker Hill, the heights overlooking the city of Boston. The heroic stand of American patriots in battle inspired the colonists in their struggle for independence. This is problematizing a textbook. If I ask, what's the dominant perspective? Is that a British or an American perspective? What would students say? Tell me what are the words that would tell you that this is an American perspective? It's a heroic stand. They were patriots. Yeah, the British were the aggressors, right? They attacked. They were inspired. By the way, I want you to note even that visual has been cropped because that's the actual painting. But in the textbook, so what do you assume that guy on the right is about to do? If you see it here, charge up that hill. What's he really getting ready to do? Right? So you crop the image, you marry it to, by the way, this does not lie. I use this again with an American audience. I said, who won the Battle of Bunker Hill? There were 100 teachers in the audience. They all said, oh, we did. I said, no, you didn't. This is a British victory. Does that caption lie? Yeah, never claims an American victory. It just says they were inspired in their struggle. Right? But students reading that will assume that it's an American victory because it's been carefully crafted for a particular audience. So we use something we call this a quadrantal examination. And we cover up and we ask them to look for details in this smaller piece. What do you notice here? Who's pushing up the hill? And how do you know they're British? By the way, I'm just modeling the background. If I don't know redcoats are British, I couldn't answer your question. But if I've taught, the redcoats are the British, who's pushing up the hill? What's happening here? You see the poor guy's about to be bayoneted by the British. They're trying to hold off. Whose flag's going up the hill? Right? So we ask students then, looking at this, rewrite the caption, first of all, from a British perspective. If you were to write this caption, how could you change? Just give me a really quick example because we're almost out of time. Give me something you could change that would shift this to a British perspective. Done. British flag. Yeah. Okay, so they were rebels, traitors, but they weren't patriots. Anything else? The British victory, and maybe the American traitors or rebels are subdued in their whatever, but we change. Now the real challenge, write me a balanced caption that's neither pro-British nor pro-American. What would that sound like? And getting students to have to work with language and realize that language has power and it suggests certain perspectives. How do you create the balanced one? I'm going to show you this last one. We call this this is a judge the better best. We call it where do you draw the line. Imagine if I asked students, at what point, if we accept that the right to life is a basic human right, if we accept that as a premise, and the denial of food to a child threatens their life, then we should accept that the denial of food is a violation of basic human rights. At what point is a child's right violated? I have all the food I want. I get 3 meals a day, but no extras, no snacks. I get 2 meals a day, but they're not always healthy. I get 1 meal a day. I have access to virtually no food. And the students have to draw the line and defend, why would you say this? By the way, remember where you draw the line. Below that, the world has an obligation to act, to take action, because a violation of a child's human rights is occurring. Where do you draw the line? Defend why they're not higher, not lower. And kids engage in that debate or discussion. I problematize this conversation. By the way, we can modify this. How bad do the storms have to get before we acknowledge that climate change is real and we better take action? I'm serious. How bad? I remember in 2008, by the way, in 2008, healthcare and climate change were the two biggest issues in Canadians' minds. And then the economic crash hit. And guess where climate change went? Because we had to maintain jobs, the climate was secondary. How bad does it have to get before we're willing to say we have to take some serious action? Where do you draw the line on climate change? Where do you draw the line on cyberbullying? Where do you draw the line on poor eating habits? Like, at what point are we willing to take action? Just wanted to show you, just problematizes and raises the conversation. So we're out of time, but what I'm hoping I've done is plant some ideas for you. I do have a sheet in here, but I wanted to show you. This is a sheet we have on lecturing that I can send as a Word document. We call it Turning Lectures into an Interactive Asynchronistic Dialogue. And these are just a dozen strategies we can use to problematize lectures in front of large groups, because we really believe we need to move away from belief. Just because I have a large class doesn't mean I can't invite provocative questions, an opportunity to share some thoughts, and talk with each other, problematize the lecture. So these are just a dozen ways. I'll send it as a Word document that you can just play with, throwing a few things in lectures occasionally. Lectures are an important part of the learning. They build that content knowledge. So what question is, how do I problematize that important part of the learning process? So I hope there were bits and pieces that were useful in the important work that you do. Yes? You've got that. By the way, I just want to point out, can you say that again?
Okay, so Saturday, the 30th of September, 1950, at 11:48:30.
By the way, I want you to note, had I given you the answer, you would not have taken the time to do some independent research to find that, which proves that we shouldn't. Thanks so much. Thank you.